Let me welcome my guest, who's a lecturer at Carnival Studies, University of the West Indies, Creative Industry Analyst, coordinator of the Undergraduate Carnival Studies BA program. She has spent a lot of time researching this thing called event and festival and cultural tourism. Many different parts are broken down into, and taking a read of some of the papers she's written on this is going to give you a good insight as to what we can do, should be, and should at least target to do to make profitable this whole question of carnival that is upon us. So let me welcome Dr. Joanne Tull. Thank you so much for coming back with us.
Thank you very much for having me. Good morning to you, Rennie. Good morning to your listeners on 107.7.
And I thank you so much. I simply say it's a Happy New Year to you at the same time.
Thank you very much. Happy New Year to you and to your listeners as well.
You have researched individually and collaboratively both in Trinidad and Tobago, the region, carnivals, jazz festivals, many other attractions, also called event or cultural or festival tourism. Yes. Please differentiate the difference between event tourism and festival tourism so we understand what foundation we seek to build this. Yes.
Well, event tourism is simply, as the two words suggest, people leaving one place and going to another place. And notice I've not used the word destination as yet, because you can also have local event tourism, someone leaving one part of a country and going to another part to engage in a particular event. And in that regard, the event could be, we can even consider sport to fall into that category, as is often done nowadays. But festival tourism, which is where I know we want to spend our time on, is where the event now is cultural, and in particular is some kind of celebration that is a spectacle that engages or involves a showcasing as well as spectators watching on. So there's showcasing, there is engagement of those looking on, and then there are those who are just simply spectators. And that, of course, is just a very loose definition of a festival. And in the region, we have many different kinds of festivals. Of course, our predominant festival in the region would be a carnival or a carnival-like festival, but we have also become quite versed in jazz festivals, music festivals, particularly with the intention of drawing people to our shores as a way of diversifying the tourism product that we have in the Caribbean.
And that's why I asked you to differentiate, because something like a jazz festival is an event more than it is a festival. Am I correct in saying
no,
that?
it's a festival.
That would be a festival
there are different times. There are different types of festivals. A typology of festivals would be music festivals. You have carnivals. You have culinary festivals. You have hybrids, which are those that are a mixture of culinary as well as music. You may even have a broadcast festival. And Trinidad and Tobago did have one time, which was the Ring Bang Festival. Broadcast being that you are not expected to go there, but it is scripted in a way that you will sit home and watch this broadcast of this festival, and the revenue is derived from, of course, sponsorship and advertising dollars.
Okay.
So that, for example, last year when the Soca Monarch made the decision, organizers, to show the event, the competition, after the event was held, the competition was held, is an example of a broadcast event or a broadcast festival. Yes.
Dr. Joanne Tull is my guest. What do we have in Grenada, Spice Mass, Vincy, Carnival. We've got in Barbados, Crop Over, Jamaica, of course, seeking to fulfill their growing carnival appetite. So we've got a lot of things happening. I'm going to put you in a little trouble here, hopefully not. Firstly, and it may be subjective, but here is the question anyway, is Trinidad and Tobago the region's biggest street festival or carnival? Question one.
Right. So if we are looking at the region being CARICOM, or the English-speaking Caribbean, the answer to that would be yes.
Right. That means that Brazil is the exception there. It was done for that specific reason. From what you have researched in this sphere, the area of the region, would you concur with the assumption and the promotion that this is indeed the greatest carnival on earth?
Right. So it depends now on the perspective from which you take. I know there are those who what we call, when I say we, I am hinging now my argument on the literature, with regard to cultural studies, what we may call the purists, those who believe that the art should be displayed for art's sake, those who believe that the art should be showcased because those who are the displayers or the performers or the artists themselves are doing it for the good of the society and what have you, and therefore that we in the society in turn should respect what they give us, and as well as not to try to taint it in any way or not to taint it too much. And by extension, oftentimes when the argument is posited, there is the concern that the business dimension of the arts, and in this domain of which we are speaking, the business domain of festivals or of a carnival or the economics of carnival sometimes taints what is the product, or I should not even use the product, taints the art itself. And through the years, therefore, because there is the perception that there has been this tainting of the art because of the business dimension, this is no longer the greatest show on earth. And I think it's important that that perspective is laid there, because people, of course, are entitled to their views.
Yes, subjective, as I
No,
said.
the listeners have heard what is my background. So therefore, I am somewhere in the middle going to the other end, which is to say that when I certainly look at the Trinidad and Tobago Carnival, I see it as a multifaceted outpouring. It's a heritage asset in one instance. It is also a product in another instance. It is something that we do every year, and it generates revenue in various elements. And I'm sure we will get to talk about that a little bit.
That is specifically,
but it's also art. And when I put all of that together, I find it difficult to say that it is still not one of, if not the greatest show on earth. But certainly in terms of a carnival, it does try to live up to that imagination. So
the differentiation I sought, and the reason I sought to seemingly have you make a leading statement, was not for bragging rights, but to make the point that if this is or, as you said, one of the greatest events in the world, carnivals in the world, my question is, from the size of the festival, have we in Trinidad and Tobago monetarily benefited from what is billed as the greatest show on earth?
Well, no. We still are trying to figure out our way in terms of that nexus between the economics of carnival and the wider economy.
Because you have done the study on this, and like I said, I laid the carpet, guys. We are outside of the house now. Because you have studied this all around the region and for a long time, what is there primarily the top three reasons we have not been able to, not the year-round situation, we'll get there after, but we have not been able to extract the most monetary gain from our carnival? Why have we not been able to do this? And you can even make a comparison to some of the countries your paper alluded to, like St. Vincent and Grenada.
Well, right across the region, unfortunately, the top one reason is that we have not developed a framework for measuring. If you do not measure, you cannot know what you have. And in not knowing what you have or not knowing its worth, it means, therefore, it's difficult to establish the necessary frameworks and systems that would allow for the documentation to count at the macro level. The fact of the matter is, which I think a lot of us still are not aware of, because we still use relatively, I don't want to say informal ways of measuring, but in terms of the way in which our macroeconomic systems are set up, the way in which we measure festivals and carnivals is not in sync with how we may measure other industries. I know that when we pull the data and what have you, we are often told, well, it's difficult to put that in or to sync it with the other data in terms of oil and manufacturing and what have you, because it's using a different system or a different approach. You can't just you can't just throw those numbers inside of there. So that, and then, of course, if I may say, we don't measure frequently. And sometimes we measure haphazardly because it depends on the money that has been given towards measuring.
Or the recognition of the need for a CSO or so on.
Well, and I'm coming now to the next part. And if we don't train persons to do the measuring, then it's very much difficult then for the institutions that have been trusted with the responsibility of measuring to stretch beyond the traditional sectors. Another thing that people are not aware of, and this is of course in no deference to any Minister of Culture, nor is the public supposed to blame the Minister of Culture, but certainly at the regional level, if the particular ministers do not ask for these things to be measured frequently, then they will not be seen as a priority within the respective CSOs across the region.
If you don't have the statistical data, you cannot get anywhere close into understanding how you are going to advantage or correct and or capitalize
now,
on. Yes, I see what you're saying.
What has happened, fortunately for us in the region, because the carnivals in particular have made notable or noticeable inroads for tourism, one would find that you would get the data coming out of the ministries of tourism more so than falling under the umbrella of the Ministry of Culture. But again, what that data is likely to yield to you or to say to you is really about that relationship between the festival and tourism, the relationship between visitor spending and whatever it is you are offering as the carnival or as the festival. It will not tell you about local consumer spending patterns or local consumer spending behavior. And so we tend to be, I do not wish to say anecdotal, because methods or methodologies such as observation and ethnography are very critical when one is analyzing any domain of culture, including festivals and carnivals. But of course, if we're talking about having sturdy quantitative assessment, we would need to go beyond that. Beyond our ability to observe well or to engage in experiential data collection. We would need to go beyond that and have methods and systems of gathering those numbers that would be respected and considered part of the central bank, for example's system of data for all our various sectors.
So specialty being in the area of festival management, project management in the arts and so on. It is our pleasure to have with us Dr. Joanne Tull. We are talking about Carnival here because for circumstances beyond our control, we are locked into a short period of time. I want to quantum leap into a couple of things. I know that you advise governments on event tourism and so on. I know that you're looking into some of what we talked about, the mechanics necessary here. Should there be a public-private partnership, or is this primarily the function of a government tourist board? Because sometimes, with all good intentions, they are governments unable to harness the expertise and or because of the bureaucracy, the ability to implement a lot of these things that I read you suggested that we have to do, and some of them you articulated here. Should this be a public-private collaboration?
Yes, Rennie, it must be, because when one think about culture, remember, festivals are very dynamic. Festivals, especially the carnivals, they have a lot of stakeholders involved. And the stakeholders involved themselves generate activities, produce activities that generate revenue and generate activity that should be counted. One would find in any event, even if we had all of the staff in the world, that we were the richest nation in the Caribbean and we could do it, you would still need that private sector partnership in terms of them feeding you data. When one looks at other sectors, and we can even look at the tourism, because tourism is very closely related to the festivals. The hospitality sector is able to generate its numbers because the stakeholders on the private sector side, the hoteliers, the restaurateurs, and what have you, would submit whatever are the necessary bits of data. For example, hotel occupancy. They will give them numbers in terms of quality, in terms of their ability to watch the environment, to be more environmental friendly. They will tell you what are their peak seasons and what are not. They can tell you what are people's preferences in terms of activities, where they will go on the islands when they come to stay with them, and so on and so forth. And so in a similar manner, what needs to happen, and I'm not saying that it does not happen, again, I'm stressing to our listeners that it's really about a systemization of what already happens. Because many of the key stakeholders do feed information and have done studies on them on their own independently and given the information to government. But we're at a stage now where this needs to be more systematized and certainly needs for an harmonization that would lead us now to be able to respectfully acknowledge the data that is given and that it can go somewhere for us in terms of making policy and what have you.
Very important that you say that, because on the one hand, I think that folks will clamor for more, a greater thrust into the area of tourism if they understand that it is not only a case of bringing foreign exchange to the country, but it does in fact impact seriously on their communities.
It very much does, and I'm very glad that you've raised it in that way. Myself and another colleague, we are currently writing a book. We're pushing in that direction on marketing to attract visitors and at the same time to maintain local cultures. And the fact of the matter is, if the local culture is not maintained, if the local culture is not promoted, you will find very soon that the tourists, that cultural tourists, will not want to come to your destination. The cultural tourist tends to be a very discerning kind of visitor. They are very clear before they set foot on that plane what they are coming to see, what they're going to consume. They are not really likely to stay in an all-inclusive. They want to go there and sample all of the local everything, not just the festival.
Yes.
And so therefore, when one considers and contemplates how one strengthens that cultural tourism product or that festival tourism product, attention has to be given to the local effort. And so that means, for example, in our carnival context, enhancing as much as possible and strengthening the regional carnival product. So that whilst the regional carnivals are there, and we know they exist, but everybody focuses on Port of Spain, we need to give a lot of attention to the regional carnival product and even think about how possibly we can enhance their capacities, that this perhaps can be something that can be offered even outside of the carnival season, that then you have a heritage tourism product that is generating interest and demand throughout the year or at another part of the year.
I, for instance, live in Laventille. I live on the hill where you can go up to the genesis, some will argue, of Steel Pan here. How it in fact impacts on that community is because the roads would have to be repaired.
For example,
infrastructurally, a lot of things would have to be done to make it acceptable to tourists. So again, the local economy is the local community benefits greatly from that thrust into that. Work ethic is an issue that I've got to raise with you, because I know in talking about getting the best bang for the buck with your visitors, you have to get them here. In order to get them here, they must know that they're coming to something that will cater to them. Folks misunderstand that, but if you're doing service, that's part of it. Is our work ethic in Trinidad and Tobago and the service industry attitude generally. Is it beyond retooling, or there is a chance what we're doing is acceptable?
Well,
I choked, forgive me.
I won't. What we do will never be acceptable. I'm someone who believes in always trying to do better, to be better, to get greater, so that even if it were not a controversial question, so to speak, what we are doing right now could never be better. I believe that there's always that room for growth and retooling. But the interesting thing is about when one works in the cultural sector, particularly with the festivals, and I've seen it repeatedly. The festival itself, the festival experience generates productivity. It does. People are very happy. I had a colleague in Bahamas doing work about how one can use the festival experience to enhance productivity in private sector organizations. And he has done some Roosevelt Finlayson. He has done some workshopping in that regard as to how to use the festival experience and working in the festival domain to improve productivity in other sectors.
An academic I have here is Dr. Joanne Tull, who I am very shortly going to say also politician. That was a wonderful way of dancing around. How abysmal is our service is my question. Let me get more specific.
Well, the thing about it is, I think it's right across the board. I mean... And I suppose that
right across the board in the region, you mean?
yeah, and I suppose that one of the things I have noticed traveling, that this is becoming a global problem.
Yes, it is.
Because
Yes, it is.
I have experienced, I mean, if I don't want to pick on US, poor US is being picked on a lot nowadays, but some things I would see here in the Caribbean I have experienced there.
Yeah. That's because of the movement of people.
So who knows? But the thing is this: if I always like to look at the silver lining, is that if it is that we've been given this gift, and I believe I want to throw the word indigenous in here, the word indigenous not just suggests that it's of your own, but for me it also suggests that these are things that you naturally do. And that you enjoy doing. And so we've been given this gift of a carnival, so to speak, that comes along with certain capacities and capabilities and creativities. And we have an ability to innovate, though I believe we're rather lazy with that as well. But when you have all of that collectively, that is supposed to urge you on. Now, I believe that governments do have a role in this regard. I always use Barbados going into tourism as an example. I remember when that was started, the government had this motto. I don't know if it still is that. Tourism is our business. Let's play our part. And they did an extensive public service campaign around that in trying to show people across the various communities as to how tourism could be their business. Not necessarily that they worked in tourism, but that certainly in saying good morning and hello and a visitor asking how to get there or what is the best way to access something, that they could answer them and of course basically play their own respective part in ensuring that we would maximize from tourism. And that of course also included training, putting it within the curriculum. And so when we talk about service, I mean, even in my course lot, I teach service within festival management. But we don't really teach these things. And we believe that these things are not teachable or they ought not to be taught. But I think we're at a point where, as you've suggested, where one can possibly see, and data probably supports it, that correlation between low productivity and poor service delivery, that we're probably at a point now where we need to teach these things as well.
I'm running up against the clock, but I'm going to buy 5 minutes on the other side. Unfortunately, as I said, we had truncated some of the conversation we had here. I do want to ask you, cannot have you leave here without asking you for the top 3 things we need to pay attention to maximize and make it a wonderful diversification area, because the economy is looking for as much as that as it can receive. But before that, I need you to just tell us about intellectual property, how difficult it is to protect it, how important it is to protect it, and how does it stand up now with the technology?
Okay, so how difficult is it to protect it? Well, it's difficult. I'm going to link it to your third question because of technology. Digitization has made it a double-edged sword. On the one hand, it has allowed for greater access, and at the same time, it has, in making it of greater access, it has presented a scenario where one can easily not benefit from the rents of your intellectual property should your work be accessed in a free domain, so to speak.
Can I beg you to define for our listeners intellectual property?
Wow. So intellectual property is really these bundle of rights we have. We particularly in the region tend to be concerned a lot with copyright. That's on the one hand, but we also have industrial property, which would be things like patents, trademarks, industrial designs. I suspect I'm leaving out one, but we tend in the region to focus a lot on copyright, but we really should be focused on all. In the domain of Carnival, a lot of attention would be given to things like patent. Patent, for example, would cover innovations, for example, things to do with the steel pan. But the copyright is what would cover things like works of mass, music, visual arts, all the performing arts. In Trinidad and Tobago, and let's deal with Trinidad and Tobago because the rest of the region kind of tricky. In Trinidad and Tobago, we tend to focus a lot on music now because of the fact that that is where we have most of the rights being covered, so to speak, where there are collective agencies that seek to protect those particular rights. Now, the thing is, the Copyright Act of Trinidad and Tobago covers all of the performing arts, including works of mass. I believe there is one TTCO who covers mass now, and of course someone can call in and correct that, but that is my recent understanding. So the fact of the matter is, it does not stop or preclude any of the other areas of arts, those who are involved in dance, theater, because all of these things impact on Carnival. We see dancers, we see performers all through the season, from coming together and forming a collective rights agency that could also safeguard their rights.
All right, so only because we have exhausted the time, I must ask you the top 3 priorities for whether it be the Tourist Board, the Ministry of Culture, and or nationals collectively, individually and or collectively, that we should put as the things we must do if we are to maximize the thrust of visitors we have coming to our shores.
Right, and this is for 2017.
For 2017,
okay, well,
yes,
I believe it should be an operationalization of the festival towards efficiency. That should be the first one. And what I mean by that is that whatever is to be done in terms of rolling out the festival, we want to pay critical attention to wastage. Because the wider context of what we are operating in now is a recession. And so this is, to me, this year should be the test piece for all of us who are managers or who are executors of various aspects of the Carnival, to ensure that we can minimize the waste. What we know that we do well, do it even better. And of course, through the experiences, to document is very critical. We don't do it enough, whether it's to count, as we were talking before, but even to document your practices, that we can all then learn from each other in terms of what are our benchmarks for success, and where are the areas where we can strengthen, because next year the recession is not going to go, and we will have to operate in that domain again. I suppose my third would be I think it's not too late to put a lot of attention on the regional carnivals. And when I say that, I mean even in terms of our communities, seeing them via our media, what have you. I think something should be put in place that we can showcase those more, that we can have a greater sense of what is happening in those regional carnivals, because I believe the community development and community engagement component of the carnival will always be critical. That is the basis of strengthening our home demand, as I would call it, or local demand, because once that is strong, we will always be able to appeal to a visitor from outside.
Your area of expertise, along with the fact that you work with governments right now, and I know that you're on the ground doing a lot of studies in this carnival right now, would you say there is an appreciation for what can come in the dollar sense to a country by those who are making the decision that this is meaningful? Nothing will replace oil. However, is there an appreciation that this can be a meaningful part of that diversification trust?
Oh yes, for the years, and I will not disclose the years I've been doing this work, but for the years I've been doing this work, we have come a long way. I remember that being the Marlboro theme. We've come a long way, baby. Yeah. We have come a long way. As I've said before, we are now at the point now where our awareness has to be translated now into action, some very critical action steps that would reflect that we are aware, that we can be able to use the tangible results, or to use the documentation that I was speaking about before as a basis for future planning and for planning well, as opposed to having to rely on anecdote or having to skirt around controversy and therefore using controversy as the basis for making decisions. And we need to come away from that now, because the interesting thing about it is that the festival tourist that comes, whilst they don't care about those things really, after a while it affects your local demand. And when you stop being hot, they're going to the next destination. We
need to start looking at proactive and not reactive.
That is correct.
Dr. Joanne Tull, thank you so much. I just want to remind listeners that you can find Dr. Tull's interview, like all my guests this morning, up on our YouTube channel. In addition to, there is a 4-part discussion we had with her last year. And you can go up and you can pull that down and pay attention to it equally, because some of the details we wanted to go into, she laid the foundation in that last discussion we have. You can go up on our website. Go up on our website and you will be well served to pay attention to it. Doctor, thank you so much for taking the time to come in this morning.
Thank you very much for having me, and it was a pleasure as usual.
Next time I'll talk to the weatherman so we get you for my full period.